The fortress of Cragvind stood against the horizon like a monument carved from the bones of the earth. Its walls were high and grim, the colour of iron when the moonlight struck, and each battlement gleamed with frost so thick it seemed as if the stone itself had turned to ice. The tundra stretched out beyond, white and endless, broken only by dark pines bent low beneath the weight of snow. It was the year 487 CE, a time when winter in the north was not a season but a sovereign ruler, crueler than any chieftain, more relentless than any warband. On this night, the air itself felt sharpened into blades. The wind howled through cracks in the rock as though spirits of the dead were gnashing their teeth. Icicles hung like spears from the eaves, and the gates groaned under the assault of the storm. Within the stronghold's walls, families pressed close together in the drafty chambers, breath steaming, hands raw and cracked from cold. Children whimpered beneath threadbare blankets. Their cries,
"It's muffled," against their mothers' shoulders. The cold crept everywhere, into every joint, every chamber, every lung, until the fortress seemed less like a shelter than a stone tomb. At the centre of this inhospitable fortress walked Lady Alara, widow of the chieftain whose death in battle had left her burdened with command. She was tall, her hair dark as ravens' wings, braided tightly and dusted with frost. A cloak of wolf pelts dragged across the stones as she moved, its heavy folds stirring the smoke from the torches. She carried no crown, no carved staff of authority, only the weight of her people's survival and the iron-hilted axe that had belonged to her husband. Though her hand rarely touched its blade, the weapon hung at her side as a reminder. The mantle of power had passed to her, and she bore it with unflinching gravity. The news had come at dusk. Scouts had returned, faces pale, whispering of fires in the valley below. Enemy warriors had gathered, their camp dotted with glowy embers that flared like the eyes of beasts in the night. They had not attacked, not yet. They were waiting for the cold to do their work for them, for Cragvind to weaken, for bodies to fail before steel was drawn. Their patience was a weapon sharper than their axes, and it coiled around Alara's people like a noose. Inside the great hall the clan gathered. Torches flickered against stone walls veined with ice, and the great hearth at the centre sputtered, flames struggling against the draughts that cut through the chamber. Warriors in leather and iron shifted uneasily near the fire, stamping their feet to chase away numbness. Women wrapped children in pelts, whispering prayers to the ancestors. Elders hunched like crooked trees, joints swollen and aching. Even the dogs, usually restless, lay curled tightly together, shivering despite their thick coats. Alara stepped into the hall, and silence followed her. Her boots struck the flagstones with a rhythm both steady and commanding. She paused before the hearth, looking into its meagre glow. Sparks leapt, then died. The woodpile beside it was small, dangerously small. A leader who fed the fire too freely would leave her people defenseless tomorrow. A leader who hoarded fuel would see them freeze before dawn. It was a balance as delicate as the edge of a blade. She turned to the clan, her voice carrying across the hall. "The cold will kill us before steel can touch us. Tonight the frost is our enemy, more cunning than the tribe that waits below. If we endure, we fight tomorrow. If we falter, we are already conquered." Her words were not soft, they were forged of iron. They did not soothe, but they steadied. Men lifted their heads. Mothers clutched children tighter. Fear did not vanish, but it bent under the weight of her resolve. Her first command was swift. Every scrap of hide, wool, and fur was to be gathered. The people obeyed, stripping beds, pulling cloaks from hooks, even surrendering garments too thin to matter. They layered themselves into cocoons, sewing together bear pelts and sheepskins, weaving thick mats upon the floor where families could lie in clusters. Ilara's own bed, raised high and draped with black bear hides, she ordered dismantled. "Take it," she said. "A leader does not sleep in warmth while her people freeze." The act rippled through the hall like a spark. If their lady would yield her comfort, none could cling to theirs. Her second command: the fire must not die. She ordered oak, sacred to their ancestors,
cast upon the flames. The hearth roared higher, the smoke curling upward like an offering. Warriors bowed their heads, whispering invocations. Strength against the cold. Strength against the dawn. The flames became more than heat. They became faith itself, a symbol that their ancestors had not abandoned them. Her third command drew the clan closer still. The great hall filled with bodies, pressed shoulder to shoulder, breath mingling, warmth spreading where ski touched fur. Pride gave way to necessity. Warriors leaned against one another, children curled in laps, and elders were blanketed by younger arms. Elara's wolfhounds, Frostfang and Shadowpelt, nosed their way among the crowd, sprawling at the hearth, where their thick coats radiated precious warmth. Slowly, the hall ceased to feel like a tomb and began to thrum with fragile life. Then came the ritual of the stones. Warriors pulled great rocks from the fire, glowing red, wrapping them in hides before tucking them into cradles and beneath blankets. The hiss of heat meeting frost filled the chamber. A child squealed with laughter as steam curled into the air, the sound striking like sunlight in the gloom. Elara herself lifted one of the stones, its warmth searing through the hide, and placed it beside a shivering elder. She drank deeply from a cup of fermented honey steeped with herbs, the liquid fire burning her throat, and passed it to others. The brew was scarce, but she demanded all. Taste it, for even illusion of strength was better than surrender. Yet the night was merciless. Frost crawled along the walls like a living thing. A young warrior near the outer door slumped, his lips blue, his eyes rolling. Panic whispered through the hall. Elara knelt, pressing her cold fingers to his neck. The pulse was faint, fading. To save him meant using more wood, risking tomorrow's battle. To let him die meant surrendering morale before the fight even began. Her choice was a knife in her hand. She rose, lifting the warrior's limp body. Her voice cut through the murmurs. No one dies tonight. She hurled another oak log onto the fire. Flames exploded upward, light blazing across the rafters, casting her shadow tall and unyielding. The risk was real, but so was her defiance. The clan inhaled together, as though her command had filled their lungs with borrowed breath. Outside, the storm shrieked. The drums of the enemy carried faintly through the snow, a reminder that another foe waited for dawn. Elara fixed her gaze on the great doors, the timber groaning under the assault of wind. "Let them wait," she murmured. "Let them freeze while we endure. When the sun rises, we will not be ashes in the snow, we will be flame." The people pressed nearer the hearth, bound by fear yet steadied by her presence. Frost still gathered, and the night was only beginning. But for the first time since dusk, they did not feel alone. Lady Elara's fire burned not only in the hearth but in their hearts, a promise that survival, though fragile, was within reach. The hours crept onward, marked not by clocks or bells but by the rhythm of the fire as it ebbed and flared, by the soft collapse of logs into ash, by the collective sighs of men and women drifting between wakefulness and exhaustion. Outside, the blizzard screamed against the walls, snow slamming like fists against the stone. Frost thickened on every surface, a silent army advancing inch by inch across beams, benches, even the very shields hung along the hall's walls. It was as if the fortress itself were being slowly claimed by ice, transformed from bastion into crypt. Lady Elara paced the hall like a sentinel, her cloak dragging across the floor, her breath white in the torchlight. Each time the fire dimmed, she felt her heart seize. She thought of the warrior she had saved, his chest now rising steadily as he lay swaddled in hides. Yet the cost haunted her. Another log gone. Another fragment of tomorrow's hope burned away in tonight's desperation. Have I saved him, or have I doomed us all? The question gnawed silently at her, but outwardly her face remained a mask of command. By the wall, a knot of warriors murmured. Their voices, though low, carried in the hollow space of the hall. "The wood will not last," one said, his beard crusted with frost. "If she feeds the fire like this, what will we burn tomorrow?" Another spat into the ash at his feet. "Perhaps it is better to let the weak go." One warrior's, "Life is not worth the clan's death.
Their words were not shouted, but they carried the sting of defiance. Ilara's ears caught every syllable. She turned, her boots striking hard. The men fell silent as her shadow loomed across them, cast tall by the hearth. "You speak of wood," she said, her voice slow, deliberate. "I speak of fire. A clan without fire is a clan already buried. If one falls tonight, despair will follow him, and then another, and another. I will not trade one man's life for the soul of Cragvind." Her gaze swept them, unflinching. The warriors lowered their eyes, chastened, though the doubt still flickered like dying embers. Not all shared her strength. In the corner, an elder woman wept quietly, clutching a child whose lips had gone pale. "The gods will not spare us," she whispered. "The ice wraiths come for our breath. We should flee into the woods, seek mercy from the enemy rather than freeze here." Fear rippled through those nearest her, like a crack spreading through. Oog, ice. Several mothers clutched their children tighter, whispering prayers. Ilara strode to the elder, kneeling before her. The woods hold no mercy. The enemy waits with fire and steel. Here, within these walls, we are one. Together we burn. Apart, we are ashes. She lifted the child, pressing the girl closer to the hearth. The child stirred, eyelids fluttering. Hope flickered, fragile, but it silenced the elder's despair. Still, the doubts did not vanish. Hunger growled in bellies, smoke stung eyes. The air grew thick with the mingled scent of wet hides, sweat, and burning resin. The fortress was not only a cage of stone, but of scent and sound, pressing down on every soul inside. A young man rose abruptly, muttering, "Better to die with a blade in my hand than rot like a rat in this hall." He strode toward the doors, his shoulders squared in defiance. Gasps followed. No one moved to stop him. Ilara stepped into his path, her hand striking the great timber door before he could push it open. Snow hissed through the cracks, spraying her cloak. Her voice dropped, quiet as the falling snow outside. "If you leave, the cold will claim you before the enemy can. Do you think the storm spares the brave? It spares no one. Stay and fight with us at dawn. Leave, and your bones will be the first our foes find in the snow." The young man's jaw clenched, pride wrestling with terror. Finally he bowed his head and returned to the crowd, his defiance dissolving into silence. Ilara turned back to her people. "The storm tests us. The enemy waits for cracks in our spirit. There will be none." She lifted her husband's axe high, its blade catching the firelight. "This fortress is not stone. It is flesh. It is breath. It is all of you. Tonight we prove we are stronger than the storm." Her words rolled across the hall, heavy as the wind outside. For a moment the murmurs ceased, but the night was long and the storm unrelenting. Ice crept further across the floor, shining like glass in the flickering torchlight. The fire demanded more wood, more sacrifice. Ilara felt the weight of every log, every scrap of fur burned to ash. Her people leaned upon her strength, yet she carried the knowledge that strength was not infinite. Survival tonight meant hunger tomorrow, fatigue at dawn, perhaps weakness before the enemy's charge. Her wolfhounds pressed close, Frostfang curling against her legs, Shadowpelt watching the hall with amber eyes. Their presence steadied her. In their warmth, she remembered the hunts with her husband, the nights spent by campfires when laughter had chased away the dark. She let that memory settle within her, not as comfort, but as resolve. The hall grew quiet again, save for the crack of the fire and the keening of the wind. Ilara stood watch as her people drifted into uneasy slumber, their bodies piled together, their breaths rising in mist. She alone refused rest. She alone carried the weight of dawn. Beyond the walls, enemy drums pulsed faintly. Through the storm, a reminder that this was only the beginning, that frost was but the first blade aimed at Cragvind. Midnight approached, though no one in Cragvind could measure the hour precisely. Time in the fortress was not counted by the stars. The storm had smothered the sky in an endless shroud of snow, but by the rhythm of the fire. Each time the flames sagged low, hearts sank. Each time a spark leapt upward, spirits rose again. The great hall lived and died with its hearth. By now the woodpile was dangerously thin. Only a few logs remained, stacked neatly beside the hearth like the last defenders of a battlefield. Smoke clung to the rafters, stinging eyes and throats, and the hall reeked of wet hides, sweat, and the acrid tang of ash. Families lay in huddled clusters, children pressed against mothers, warriors curled against one another, their breath a fog weaving through the room. The fire's light painted them in shades of copper and shadow, fragile islands of warmth adrift in
a sea of cold stone. Lady Ellara sat near the hearth, her cloak racked around her shoulders, her husband's axe across her knees. She stared into the embers, watching them pulse like a dying heart. Her body begged for rest, but her mind remained sharp, circling the same relentless thoughts. How much longer until dawn? How many logs must I spend before the enemy comes? How many lives can I trade to preserve the flame? Each question cut deeper than steel. She rose suddenly, striding to the woodpile. Her hand closed on a log, but she did not lift it. She hesitated, weighing not just the timber's weight, but its meaning. A single log might save the fire now, but cost them later. Behind her, someone coughed weakly, the sound rattling like broken glass. She turned to see the same young warrior she had saved earlier, his face pale, his breath shallow. The firelight barely reached him, and in that dimness she saw the truth. If the flames faltered, so would he. A murmur spread through the hall. People were waking, sensing the chill pressing closer, the air thickening with frost. Eyes turned to her, pleading, fearful, accusing. Elara's jaw tightened. She could not wait any longer. She seized the log and thrust it onto the fire. Sparks burst upward, flames licking skyward with renewed ferocity. The hall exhaled as one, relief palpable, yet she knew what it cost. One more piece of tomorrow had been burned tonight. The reprieve did not last. An hour later, the flames shrank again, their crackle reduced to a whisper. The warriors at the hearth exchanged glances, but none moved. All waited for her. The weight of expectation pressed heavier than the cold itself. She stepped forward again, but this time there was no hesitation. She threw another log into the fire. The blaze roared, fierce, casting her shadow tall and unyielding upon the walls. She turned to her people, her voice ringing through the hall. No one dies tonight, do you hear me? Not by frost, not by fear. The enemy waits for us to falter, but we will not. We endure together. Her words carried like thunder. Children stirred, clinging tighter to mothers. Warriors sat straighter. Even the elder who had wept earlier wiped her eyes, nodding faintly. Elara's defiance seeped into them like warmth itself, invisible but undeniable. Yet the fire demanded more, always more. At last, only 2 logs remained. The room seemed to shrink around them, every eye fixed upon the dwindling pile. Whispers returned. We cannot last. Dawn is too far. The fire will die, and so will we. Elara heard them but did not answer. She crossed the hall to the doors, laying a hand on the frozen timber. The storm shrieked beyond, rattling the iron hinges. For a moment she imagined flinging the doors open, letting the wind sweep through and freeze them all, ending the struggle in one swift stroke. The thought shamed her, but it was there, lurking like a shadow in her heart. She returned to the hearth. One log she set aside. Last she lifted high for all to see. This, she declared, is not just wood. This is tomorrow. This is hope. When I place it on the fire, it will burn not only for warmth, but for every breath in this hall. And when it is ash, we will still stand. We will still breathe. We will still fight. She cast it into the fire. Flames exploded, brighter than before, licking the rafters, scattering sparks that danced like stars. The clan gasped, then cheered softly, voices rising despite exhaustion. The hall glowed, transformed not into comfort but into defiance. Elara sank to her knees before the hearth, thrusting her hands into the blaze until the skin blistered. She hissed through clenched teeth but did not pull away until the flames roared steady. When she turned back, her palms were raw, red, marked by fire. She held them up for all to see. "The cold cannot take me," she said, "and it will not take you."
The silence that followed was heavy, awed. Her people believed her, not because the storm had lessened, not because the fire would last, but because she had given them her own flesh as proof of her vow. From outside came the sound of drums, louder now, steady as a heartbeat. Enemy fires blazed on the horizon, their glow taunting, their rhythm promising blood. Yet within the hall the clan drew closer, their fear bound into unity by her words, her wounds, her will. They pressed together, mothers and children, warriors and elders, even dogs nestled among them, and for the first time that night they did not tremble. Lady Alara remained at the hearth, her blistered hands outstretched, her shadow tall against the frost-coated walls. She did not rest, she did not yield. Midnight had passed, and the hardest hours still lay ahead. But her people, once scattered by doubt, now beat as one heart, one flame. The night was long, but they were longer. The storm was fierce, but they were fiercer. And though the enemy waited for dawn, Cragvin still breathed. The hours after midnight were the cruelest. The storm outside raged with a madness that shook the very stones of Cragvind, and the fortress groaned as if it too were weary of enduring. Snow forced its way through every crack, scattering in pale drifts along the floor. The air grew so cold that even the flames seemed hesitant, shrinking back as if afraid. Inside the hall, sleep did not come easy. Families lay in tangled heaps of hides, yet their bodies shivered still. Every cough, every whimper, every shifting body was heard by all, for silence magnified sound until it weighed heavy on the ears. The cold gnawed without pause, pressing in as though it sought to smother the clan's very breath. Lady Alara remained on her feet. Her blistered hands throbbed, wrapped hastily in strips of linen torn from her own tunic. Each step she took sent pain lancing up her arms, yet she moved steadily through the hall. She checked the children first, touching foreheads, adjusting hides, tucking in glow-in. Stones now dulled to warmth rather than heat. Then the elders, fragile forms huddled close, eyes glazed with fatigue but still alive. Finally the warriors, who pretended at strength yet whose lips trembled in the firelight. The fire had dwindled again. Only a single log remained at the hearth's side, the last of the sacred oak. Alara stood over it, the hall watching with held breath. She did not feed it to the flames, not yet. Instead she crouched, feeding scraps, broken stools, splinters torn from abandoned shields, into the blaze. The flames sputtered, licked upward, reluctant, but alive. It would have to be enough. A voice rose from the shadows, hoarse and bitter. "We cannot last the night. Even if we do, what strength will remain for battle? We are already beaten." It was one of the older warriors, his beard long, his eyes ringed with frost. Others murmured in agreement, their fear spilling into words they dared not speak earlier. The fire flickered as though echoing their despair. Ilara's gaze hardened. She walked to the man, towering despite her weariness. "If you believe yourself beaten, then you are," she said, "but do not speak it aloud. Your weakness spreads faster than frost." She pointed to the slumbering children. "They hear your words even in their dreams. Give them despair and you kill them quicker than cold." The man lowered his eyes, chastened, though the bitterness did not leave him. Still the hall quieted. The silence was fragile, trembling, yet it held. Moments later, a sharp cry cut through the chamber. One of the younger warriors had collapsed, his body rigid, his teeth clenched as frostbite crept along his fingers. Panic erupted. Women screamed, children wailed, warriors surged forward in confusion. Alara shoved through the crowd, dropping to her knees beside the stricken man. His skin was as pale as the snow outside, his lips purple, his breath shallow. "Heat the stones," she ordered. "Now!" Her command snapped the hall into motion. Warriors dragged glowing rocks from the hearth, wrapping them in furs, pressing them to the man's body. Alara tore her cloak free, wrapping it around his chest, then lifted his hand to her lips, breathing warmth into frozen flesh. Her breath came fast, ragged, fogging the air around him. "You will not die," she hissed. "Not tonight. Not while I stand." Minutes stretched like hours. Slowly colour returned to his cheeks, his body softened, breath steadying. The hall exhaled as one. Relief rippled, fragile but fierce. Yet all saw the cost. The stones had cooled further, the fire had weakened, and the last log still lay untouched, its promise both salvation and doom. Whispers rose again. She wastes strength on one man. We cannot save everyone. The wood, what will she do when it is gone? Ilara stood, turning on them like a storm herself. Her voice cracked the air. Do you not see? Each life saved is a victory against the cold. Each breath taken is defiance. If you would surrender one soul,
then surrender yourselves, for frost takes all the same. Her eyes blazed, shadowed by exhaustion but unyielding. The fire will not die. Not until dawn. The whispers fell silent, not from belief but from the force of her will. Still, doubt lingered, gnawing at the edges of hope. She felt it, heavy as the stone walls around them. She returned to the hearth, dropping to her knees before the last log. Her hands hovered above it, blistered palms trembling. She closed her eyes, whispering the old runes her mother had taught her as a child. Words to call on ancestors, to drive away the ice wraiths. The runes were not spells of power but of memory, binding the living to the dead. Her voice was low, steady, and those nearest leaned in, soothed, not by the meaning but by the sound. The clan slowly hushed, their breathing aligning with her chant, until the hall seemed to pulse with one rhythm. Children slept again. Warriors bowed their heads. Elders murmured prayers of their own. The fire act, sparks flaring as if the runes had given it strength. Ilara opened her eyes. She rose, facing her people. We are not beaten. We endure. She spread her arms, palms raw and red. Tonight we share fire, breath, and blood. And when dawn comes, we will share battle. The hall answered with a murmur, faint but growing. They pressed closer, drawing warmth from one another, drawing strength from her defiance. Frost still crept along the stones, but for the moment the hall was more flame than ice. Ilara stood watch, her body weary, her mind sharp. Beyond the walls the storm shrieked. Beyond the storm the enemy's drums beat louder, echoing across the tundra. The night was far from over. Yet for now her people breathed, and as long as they breathed, they lived. The storm raged without pause, clawing at the walls of Cragvind as if it sought to tear them stone from stone. Snow whirled so thickly beyond the doors that the night seemed a white void, endless and merciless. Inside the hall, the flames guttered low, licking weakly at the charred remains of splinters and scraps. Smoke clung to the rafters, heavy, suffocating, making eyes water and throats rasp. The last log still waited by the hearth. Its presence was both salvation and accusation. Every eye in the hall drifted toward it, again and again, as if drawn by a cruel magnet. It was hope, yet it was also proof of how little remained. One log against a storm, one log against the hunger of night. What good was it? Ilara stood tall beside it, her husband's axe still across her back, her cloak torn from saving the frostbitten warrior. Her face was haggard, lined with fatigue, but her eyes glowed with an iron steadiness. She knew the doubts festering around her, the mutters that swelled like whispers of a curse. It was only a matter of time before silence broke. It began with a single voice, low but hard. She throws wood to save one man while the clan starves. Another answered, louder, bolder. Better to keep the fire for dawn. Better to let the weak die than burn what we cannot replace. The murmurs grew, weaving through the crowd like the hiss of serpents. Warriors shifted, their hands tightening on spear shafts, their eyes glinting in the fire's dim glow. Hunger and fear gnawed at them, stripping away discipline, leaving only desperation. One man rose, broad-shouldered, scarred from battles past. He had been her husband's sworn shield brother once, but his loyalty had never been hers. "Lady Ilara," he said, his voice heavy with scorn, You speak of endurance, yet you squander what cannot be spared. We follow you into death, and for what? For pride? For words?" The hall stirred. Several warriors muttered in agreement. Others lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet hers. Fear was a contagion, and it was spreading fast. Elara stepped forward, closing the space between herself and the challenger. She stood close enough to see the frost clinging to his beard, close enough that the firelight revealed
the fury in his eyes. "You doubt me," she said quietly, though her voice carried to every corner of the hall. "Say it plain." "I do," he growled. "You lead us to ruin. Better I take command, and the clan lives through the storm. You are a widow clinging to a dead man's axe, not a chieftain." The words struck like a hammer. Gasps echoed through the hall. The air thickened, charged, as if the storm outside had breached the walls and thundered within. Elara did not flinch. Slowly, deliberately, she reached over her shoulder and drew the axe. The iron blade caught the firelight, gleaming red and gold. She held it before her, not in threat, but in declaration. "This axe belonged to your chieftain, my husband. It was his strength, his command, his burden. When he fell, he gave it to me, not by choice, not by words, but by death itself. You say I am not a leader? Then take it from my hand." The hall froze. The man's eyes narrowed. For a heartbeat, he seemed ready to step forward, to seize it. He weapon, to challenge her fully. But the silence of the hall pressed upon him, the gaze of the clan heavy as stone. To raise a hand against her now would be to fracture them utterly, to doom them all before dawn. His breath hissed, fogging in the cold air. At last he spat onto the stones, his defiance sour. "Keep your axe, lady. But when the fire dies, so will your words." He sank back into the crowd, his challenge unresolved but stifled. Elara turned, facing them all. Her voice rose, fierce and steady. "Hear me, all of you. This storm is no accident. The enemy waits beyond the walls, watching for weakness, listening for division. They would not need to raise a sword if you tear each other apart. But I tell you this, if Cragvind falls, it will not be by my hand. I will burn my flesh before I burn our hope. I will bleed before I let one of you die alone. You may doubt my words, but you will not doubt my fire." She lowered the axe, driving its butt into the stone floor with a ringing crack. The sound reverberated, echoing like thunder through the hall. Her shadow loomed tall against the frost-veined walls, larger than life, larger than fear itself. The murmurs faded. Warriors lowered their eyes, chastened, though unease lingered. Mothers pressed children close, whispering prayers. Even the elder who had despaired earlier now bowed her head, lips moving silently with runes of strength. Elara sheathed the axe, her hands trembling from exhaustion, her palms blistered and raw. She walked back to the hearth, crouching by the flames, feeding it scraps of broken wood. The fire hissed, then flared, casting sparks into the smoke-laden air. For a moment, she let her eyes close. She imagined her husband standing beside her, his voice steady, his hand warm on her shoulder. "You are not alone, Elara. Lead them, even when they hate you. Lead them, and they will follow." She opened her eyes. The hall was still watching her, their faces half-shadowed, half-lit. They were not yet unedited, but they were hers, and until dawn she would hold them together by force, by fire, by the sheer weight of her will. Outside, the storm shrieked louder. The enemy drums answered deep and slow like the heartbeat of doom. But inside Cragvind the clan remained, bound by defiance, trembling but unbroken, and Lady Elara, weary and scarred, stood as their flame. The night dragged on, stretching thin like a fraying rope. Hours passed without measure, for there were no stars, no moon, no rhythm of bells. Only the endless scream of the storm outside and the faint, stubborn crackle of fire within. The great hall had become a world unto itself, a cavern of smoke, shadows and breath. Every exhale hung thick and heavy, every movement stirred frost from stone. The woodpile was gone, only splinters remained, fed one by one into the flames like crumbs to a starving beast. The fire, once proud and roaring, now crouched low in the hearth, a nest of embers glowing faintly beneath collapsing ash. Its light was pale, trembling, insufficient to push back the black that pressed from every corner. The cold crept closer with each falter, wrapping around ankles, seeping into lungs, sinking into marrow. Lady Alara knelt before the dying fire. Her blistered hands shook as she cupped them near the embers, as though willing the flames to rise by the strength of her gaze alone. Sweat stung her brow despite the chill. Exhaustion weighed upon her shoulders like chains. Her people slept fitfully behind her, huddled masses swaddled in hides, their faces pallid and damp, their dreams fevered. But even in slumber they felt the cold. Even in slumber they knew that if the fire died, so would they. A child whimpered in her sleep, voice thin as a reed. The sound pierced Ilara's heart more sharply than any enemy blade. She looked back, saw the girl's lips trembling, skin pale beneath the furs. Her mother tried to soothe her, rubbing her arms, but the cold would not release its grip. Ilara turned back to the fire. She could not allow it. She would not. She rose, scanning the hall for anything that might burn. Her eyes found benches cracked from years of weight, tables scarred by knives, shields hung on the walls, symbols of pride, of lineage. Slowly she moved to them, tearing a bench from its place, dragging it across the floor. Warriors stirred at the sound, eyes widening as they realized her intent. "My lady," one whispered, horrified, "those benches are carved with our ancestors' runes." Ilara silenced him with a glance, her voice sharp as steel. "Would you rather honor their names with wood or with lives?" She heaved the bench into the hearth. Sparks flared, smoke billowed, flames leapt with sudden fury. The runes carved into the wood hissed and blackened, consumed. The hall brightened, heat returning in fragile waves. A murmur spread, fear, awe, relief all tangled as one. She did not stop. One by one she stripped the hall of its relics, broken shields, cracked spears, even the old carved stool her husband had once used in council. Into the fire they went, each a sacrifice, each a defiance. The hall filled with acrid smoke, with the scent of burning resin and oil, but the flames grew bold again, casting their glow across the weary faces of the clan. Some wept as they watched heirlooms turn to ash, others whispered prayers. Yet none stopped her, for in that moment they saw what she gave them, not comfort, not tradition, but survival. And survival was the only legacy worth saving, but the cold was cunning. No sooner had the flames roared high than the storm pressed harder, driving ice through cracks, rattling the doors until hinges screamed. The enemy's drums beat louder now, steady, cruel, reminding all that dawn would bring not salvation but blood. Fear slithered back into the hall, winding around hearts like frost. A warrior spoke, trembling. "What if dawn never comes? What if the storm swallows us before the sun can rise?" Another voice joined. "What if the enemy storms the gates while we waste our strength on fire? Better to save what little remains, meet them with steel, die fighting." "No," Ilara cut in, her voice ringing like a blade drawn from its sheath. She stepped into the fire's glow, lifting her burned hands high for all to see. Blisters gleamed red in the light, raw and torn. "Steel will not matter if frost takes us first. A sword is nothing in a frozen hand. Dawn is not a gift, it is a battle we must earn. And we will. Together." Her people stared, eyes wide, breath caught. The flames framed her like a figure of myth, her shadow cast tall upon the frost-veined walls. She seemed less woman than spirit then, an ember given flesh, burning because she refused to die. Still, the doubts gnawed. Still, despair lingered. She felt it, heavy in the silence that followed, in the glances that turned to the dwindling fire. She knew words alone would not hold them. She needed more. So she did the unthinkable. She stepped into the hearth. In gasps erupted as she thrust her hands into the blaze, pressing her palms to the burning wood. The pain seared her nerves, fire racing up her arms, yet she did not cry out. Smoke curled around her, the stench of scorched flesh rising, but her face was calm.
eyes locked on her people. "This fire is mine," she said, voice steady despite the agony, "and through me it is yours. So long as I burn, so long as I bleed, you will not freeze." For a heartbeat the hall was silent, then a sound rose, low, ragged, growing. Not fear this time, not doubt, but resolve. Warriors pounded fists against shields. Mothers whispered blessings. Children stirred and clung tighter to warmth. The hall throbbed with life, fragile but fierce. Elara withdrew her hands at last, charred and blistered, trembling. She staggered, but Frostfang and Shadowpelt pressed against her legs, steadying her. She raised her ruined hands high once more, the firelight blazing across raw flesh. "The cold cannot take us," she cried.
Not tonight.
Not ever. The hall answered with a roar, not of triumph, but of survival, a sound to rival the storm itself. Beyond the walls, the wind shrieked, the drums thundered, but within, for the first time since dusk, the people of Cragvind did not cower. They huddled together, their breaths one cloud, their hearts one flame, and Lady Elara, scarred and unyielding, had bound them into something stronger than stone, stronger than fear. The night was not over. The storm was not broken. The enemy still waited. But for this moment, they endured, and endurance was victory enough. Midnight came, not as a silent hour, but as a weight that pressed upon every soul within Cragvind. The storm outside had not relented. If anything, its fury had sharpened. The wind screamed like a host of spirits, hurling snow against the walls in sheets so thick that the fortress trembled with every gust. Icicles shattered from the eaves, falling like broken spears onto the frozen courtyard below. The fortress was wrapped in a sound that was not mere weather, but something primal, something that seemed intent on crushing the last sparks of human will. Inside, the great hall had become a hollow of smoke and exhaustion. The fire, fed with benches, shields, heirlooms, still lived, but it was a wounded thing, reduced to a bed of embers with occasional tongues of flame that licked half-heartedly at the dark. Its glow painted the walls in frail hues, leaving whole corners in shadow. The air reeked of ash and scorched resin, of sweat and damp wool. The clan slept fitfully, bodies pressed together,
Her in nests of hides, but their rest was shallow, broken by coughing, whimpering, the gnash of teeth against cold. Elara remained upright. Her hands were wrapped in linen now, charred and blistered, yet still she moved through the hall like a wraith of iron. Her body screamed with fatigue, but her spirit refused surrender. She stepped from group to group, laying a hand on a child's brow, adjusting a cloak for an elder, murmuring runes to warriors whose eyes stared too wide in the dimness. She gave them more than warmth. She gave them the illusion that the night could be survived. But even she could not silence what lay beyond the walls. Through every crack in the shutters, light bled into the hall, a glow not of dawn, but of fires burning in the valley below. Enemy fires. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, torches and bonfires, their flames defiant against the storm. The rival tribe had kindled them deliberately, a show of strength, a taunt. "See, we are warm. See, we wait. You will die before. You fight us." The sight of those distant flames gnawed at the hearts of Cragvind's people more cruelly than the storm itself. A scout returned from the watchtower, snow clinging to his beard, his face pale with dread. "Their fires spread across the plain," he whispered, voice cracking. "They beat drums now, louder and louder. They wait for us to falter." His words, though soft, rippled through the hall, carried from ear to ear, until unease thickened like smoke. Mothers clutched children tighter. Warriors exchanged dark glances. Even the dogs whined, sensing the fear that hung in the air. Elara climbed the steps to the hearth, standing where all could see her. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The hall was already straining to hear, desperate for something to pierce the silence. "They light their fires to mock us," she said, her voice low but steady. "They believe the storm will do their work. They believe we will die before dawn. They are wrong." She lifted her ruin, hands bandaged and raw. "Look at me. The fire burns in these hands still. As long as I endure, so will you.
"We are not ashes, we are flame." The people stirred, their gazes clinging to her like drowning men to driftwood, but she saw it in their eyes still, the doubt, the despair, the weariness deeper than bone. Her words struck sparks, yes, but sparks needed fuel to become flame, and fuel was gone. A sharp crack split the silence. One of the shutters had blown loose, slamming against the wall. A blast of icy wind rushed in, scattering ash and sending flames guttering. The hall erupted in screams as the cold clawed at them, vicious and immediate. Warriors leapt to bar the shutter, pressing it closed with numbed hands, stuffing the cracks with hides, but the damage was done. The fire had nearly died, reduced to a pitiful sputter of red coals. Elara dropped to her knees, thrusting her face close to the embers, breathing on them as if her own breath could coax them back to life. Sparks tree, then faded. Her bandaged hands shook as she scraped ash aside, revealing faint pulses of heat beneath. She whispered the old runes again, lips trembling not from fear but from sheer fatigue. Behind her, the hall waited in a suffocating silence, their hope balanced on the edge of a dying flame. At last a small tongue of fire rose, fragile but real. A murmur rippled through the crowd, relief, weak and fleeting. Elara seized the moment, lifting her head, her voice fierce despite her exhaustion. "See how it lives!" she cried. "The fire is us. It falters, but it does not die. We falter, but we do not die." For a heartbeat the hall believed. Heads lifted, eyes widened. The silence broke into whispers of hope. Yet Elara knew how thin that hope was. One more gust of wind, one more failure of strength, and the flame would vanish for good. She pressed her hands into the hearth, heedless of pain, cupping the fragile flame as if to shield it with her very flesh. "Breathe with me," she told them. "All of you." And they did. Warriors, mothers, children, elders, they leaned forward, exhaling as one, their breath joining hers, feeding the tiny flame with a living wind. The ember flared, the fire crackled, a small blaze licking upward. It was not enough to warm them all, but it was enough to show them life still clung, stubborn and unbroken. The drums outside thundered louder, mocking, relentless. But inside, the clan of Cragvind found their own rhythm, the sound of breath and flame, the beat of hearts refusing surrender. Midnight had come, and it had not crushed them. Elara sank back, her body trembling, her bandages blackened with soot. Frostfang and Shadowpelt pressed against her legs, their warmth anchoring her as her vision blurred with fatigue. Yet she remained upright, her gaze fixed on the fire, her spirit refusing the darkness. For though the storm roared and the enemy waited, Cragvind still lived. And as long as life remained, dawn was not yet lost. The fir in the hearth clung to life, a fragile bloom of orange and red fighting against the black. For a moment, the people of Cragvind let themselves believe. Their breaths had coaxed the flame back, their bodies pressed close still produced warmth. Yet belief is as brittle as ice, and the night was merciless in testing it. It began with a cough, deep, wet, tearing. Heads turned toward the sound. One of the elders, a man whose hair was white as frost, doubled over, clutching his chest. His breath rattled as though each gasp drew shards of ice into his lungs. Elara rushed to his side, kneeling, pressing her hands to his shoulders. His skin was clammy, his lips pale, his eyes clouded. She whispered his name, but he did not answer. His chest rose once, twice, then stilled. A shudder rippled through the hall. The elder's family wailed softly, their grief muffled against the hides. The rest looked on with hollow eyes, fear cutting deeper than sorrow. For this death was not from a sword or arrow, but from the cold itself, an enemy that seeped invisibly through stone and bone. If it could claim him, it could claim any of them. Murmurs rose. "He is the first. There will be more. We cannot last until dawn." The fragile unity Elara had fought for all night cracked like thin ice beneath a heavy step. She stood, facing them all, her burned hands trembling but her voice iron hard. "He is not lost to frost. He is returned to the ancestors. His spirit stands among us now, guarding this hall. Do not give the cold more victory than it has earned." Her words stemmed the panic, but only barely. Fear lingered in their eyes, coiling tight around their hearts.
And in that silence, another sound emerged, a groan, deep and wooden, from the gates at the far end of the hall. The massive doors shuddered against their iron bolts. For a heartbeat, all thought it was the storm. But then came another sound, the scrape of wood, the rattle of chains. Ilara's blood chilled. Someone was at the gate. Shh. He strode across the hall, her warriors rising unsteadily to follow. The great doors quaked again, and through the cracks blew icy wind, not forced by the storm, but by hands that sought to pull the bars aside. One of her men, his face gaunt with fear, strained against the beam, trying to lift it. His breath came fast, wild, his eyes fever-bright. "Stop!" Ilara's voice rang like steel. The man froze, his hand still clutched on the beam. His gaze met hers, desperate and hollow. "We cannot wait for dawn," he gasped. "Better to face the enemy now than freeze like cattle in this tomb. At least with steel we may choose our deaths." The hall erupted in cries. Some shouted for him to obey, others echoed his desperation. Yes! Better battle than slow death. The air thickened with chaos, with the storm of fear unbound. Ilara stepped forward, the axe in her hands once more. She raised it, her voice a roar above the din. "If you open that gate, you condemn us all. The storm will take us before it."
The enemy does. "You think you choose your death? You choose our extinction." The man's hands trembled, but he did not release the beam. Tears streamed from his eyes, freezing on his cheeks. "I will not die like this. Not in silence, not in cold." For a heartbeat, the hall balanced on the edge of ruin. Then Ilara struck, not with the blade, but with the butt of the axe. The blow cracked against the man's shoulder, sending him sprawling into the frost. His cry echoed, sharp and pained, but it broke the spell. Warriors rushed forward, dragging him back, binding his hands with strips of hide. The gates held, the iron bars unmoved. Ilara stood over him, her breath ragged, her shadow tall against the frost-streaked wood. "No one will open these doors until dawn," she declared. "Not for storm, not for fear, not even for death itself. Anyone who tries will meet my axe." Her people stared, some in awe, some in terror. But all knew then that her command was law, unbreakable, unyielding. The hall fell silent again, the storm outside howling louder than their voices dared. Ilara lowered her axe, her arms trembling from the weight of it and from exhaustion. She looked upon her people, their hollow faces, their frightened eyes, and felt the crushing truth. She could not save them all. The elder's death had proved it, the traitor's desperation had confirmed it. Yet she could not let them see her despair. She had to burn brighter, even as her strength waned. She returned to the hearth, crouching once more by the fragile flame. The embers pulsed faintly, stubborn as her own heartbeat. She pressed her bandaged hands above them, her voice low but steady. "This fire is small, but it is ours. The storm has not claimed it, the enemy has not claimed it, and while it lives, so do we." Her words washed through the hall like a balm, soothing, though not curing, binding, though not healing. They drew closer again, pressing shoulder to shoulder, breath to breath. They were still afraid, still trembling, but they remained together. Outside, the enemy drums thundered, their rhythms steady as doom, but inside, beneath the fragile light of fire and the iron weight of Ilara's will, Cragvind endured still. And Ilara, scarred and weary, stood once more as the flame no storm could quench. The night deepened into an hour beyond reckoning, a darkness so complete it seemed the world itself had stopped breathing. Outside, the storm howled like an endless dirge, its voice rising and falling against the stone as though the gods themselves had joined the siege. Snow pressed into every seam of the fortress, and the gates rattled under the strain. The very air carried weight, heavy and suffocating, as though the tundra sought to bury Cragvind in silence before dawn could come. The fire, once the heart of the hall, was now a fragile skeleton of coals. The last log had burned to ash hours before. Only the remnants of benches and shattered shields glowed faintly red. Smoke curled weakly toward the afters, dispersing into the cold that pressed ever inward. Shadows consumed the chamber, and even the torches along the walls sputtered, their flames thin as thread. The people of Cragvind huddled closer than ever, bodies packed into trembling heaps, their breaths rising in ragged mist. The elders' death weighed upon them, the traitors' attempt at the gates haunted them. Their strength was nearly gone, worn thin by hunger, fear, and cold. Children whimpered in their sleep, mothers clutched them tighter, warriors stared hollow-eyed into the dimness. The hall no longer felt like a place of life, but like the antechamber of death. Lady Alara stood at the centre, her body weary to breaking. Her hands throbbed with pain beneath the linen wraps, raw and blistered from fire and frost alike. Her shoulders ached, her breath rasped, her legs trembled with fatigue. Yet her eyes still burned with iron, refusing the darkness that crept from all sides. She knew she was all that held them now, not the fire, not the walls, not the gods, her, alone. She moved among them, voice low, steady. Hold close. Share your warmth. Do not let the frost steal what we give each other. She adjusted hides, tucked stones now cool as ash into trembling hands, pressed her own body against those most fragile. Every act was small, but every act pushed back the dark. Then came the sound of splintering. All heads turned, hearts freezing. For an instant they thought the gates had given way. But no, it was the rafters above, groaning under the weight of ice. A beam cracked, scattering frost and snow into the hall. Screams rose. Warriors leapt to brace it, pushing their shoulders against the wood, straining to hold it in place. The fortress itself seemed ready to collapse, to bury them all alive. Alara rushed forward, shouting over the din, "Hold it! Do not let it fall!" She pressed her back against the beam, her body trembling under the strain. Others joined her, teeth clenched, muscles burning. Together, they forced it upright, shoving until it steadied. The hall exhaled as one, though their relief was ragged, their fear unbroken. In the silence that followed, despair settled deeper than ever. A warrior spoke, voice hoarse. "We cannot last. The storm takes our walls, the cold takes our flesh, the gods take our dead. What is left to fight with? What is left to hope for?" The words sank into the hall like stones into water. Murmurs spread, fear rising once more. Even the children felt it, their sobs muffled but insistent. Hope, once fragile, now frayed to threads. Alara rose slowly, her burned hands clenched, her body shaking with exhaustion. She climbed onto the dais by the hearth, where the embers glowed faintly. The clan's eyes turned to her, hollow, desperate, searching for something to cling to. She lifted her axe high, its blade catching what little light remained. Her voice rang out, fierce, unyielding. "Listen to me. The storm is not our master. The enemy is not our fate. We are." "Not broken." Her words cut through the murmur, silencing it. She lowered the axe, spreading her arms wide, palms raw and blistered. "I have burned my hands to keep this fire alive. I have given all that I am, and I will give more. If the flames die, I will burn myself to keep you warm. If the walls fall, I will stand in their place. If the gods turn their eyes away, then I will be your god until dawn." Gasps echoed through the hall. Some wept, some bowed their heads, others straightened, spines stiffening as her words struck sparks in their hearts. Alara knelt by the embers, pressing her bandaged hands close, whispering the runes once more. This time others joined her. First a few voices, trembling, then more, steadier. Soon the hall throbbed with the murmur of chants, hundreds of voices weaving together, calling to ancestors, calling to each other. The sound rose, filled the rafters, mingled with the storm until it seemed the fortress itself was singing. And then the strangest thing, the embers flared. Not brightly, not enough to banish the cold, but enough to send a fragile light dancing across the hall once more. The people gasped, their voices rising louder, their chants swelling. They pressed closer together, their fear tempered by unity, their despair softened by defiance. Alara rose, her shadow tall behind her, her eyes burning like coals. She looked upon her people, no longer broken but bound. "We are fire," she said, "and fire does not beg. Fire does not kneel. Fire endures." The hall roared in answer, not a roar of triumph but of survival,
of stubborn refusal to die. It shook the beams, rattled the stone, echoed into the storm outside. For a moment, even the drums of the enemy seemed to falter, drowned by the sound of a clan that still breathed, still burned. Ilara's body swayed, near collapse, but she steadied herself on her axe. Her vision blurred, her breath came ragged, but she stood, unbroken. For though the night was darkest, though hope was frail,
though dawn still lay beyond the storm, Cragvind endured, and Lady Ilara, scarred, weary, aflame with will, remained its heart. The hours before dawn were the hardest, not because they were colder, though they were, but because they stretched long and uncertain. The storm still clawed at Cragvind's walls, and the enemy's drums still echoed from the valley, slow and steady as the beat of a heart that never tired. Yet something within the hall had shifted. Fear still lived in the eyes of the clan, but it was no longer the master of their breath. They clung now not to the fire, it was little more than glowing coals, but to each other, and to the woman who stood at their centre. Lady Ilara moved through the hall like a shadow carved from iron. Her body ached, her blistered hands trembled, her lips were cracked and bleeding, yet her steps did not falter. She checked every cluster of her people, murmuring strength into weary ears, tightening bindings on wounds, sharing the last heated stones among the weakest. The ember glow painted her face in red and gold, a mask of resolve that refused to crumble. The elder's body
had been covered with furs and set aside, but Ilara did not let grief linger there. Instead, she ordered a rune-carved amulet placed upon his chest, whispering that his spirit now walked with the ancestors, guarding them through the storm. It was not truth, perhaps, but it was faith, and faith was as vital as warmth. The people believed, and belief kept them breathing. When she returned to the hearth, she found the warriors waiting. Their eyes were weary but sharpened, their hands restless upon hilts and spears. The drums outside had grown louder, closer, mocking. The enemy was preparing, the fires below blazing in defiance of the storm. Ilara knew dawn would not bring respite, it would bring blood. She addressed them, her voice rough from smoke but steady. You have endured the cold, you have endured hunger, fear, and the dark. The storm has not broken you, the night has not claimed you. And when the sun rises, neither will our enemies. The warriors straightened, pride stirring faint,
lie in their hollow chests. Some muttered oaths, others struck fists against shields. The hall filled with a low hum of resolve, fragile yet real. Ilara gave orders. Weapons were to be checked, sharpened if possible. Armor strapped tighter, spears repaired with bindings torn from hides. Even broken shields were lashed together, fragments turned into defense. Every hand that could hold a blade was given one. Even the women carried knives, and the children who were old enough clutched stones, ready to hurl if the gates fell. It was not preparation for glory. It was preparation for survival. The fire might fail, the walls might crack, but they would not go quietly into frost. Her wolfhounds, Frostfang and Shadowpelt, paced restlessly at her side, hackles raised, ears pricked to the storm. They sensed what was coming. Their low growls blended with the howl of the wind, a reminder that beasts too could feel the weight of impending dawn. One warrior approached, his face gaunt but his eyes fierce. It was the man who had once challenged her in the night, who had nearly broken the clan's unity. He bowed his head low before her. Lady, I doubted you. I spoke against you, but you stood when I could not. Command me now, and I will follow to death if need be. Ilara placed a burned hand upon his shoulder. Then follow me to life, not death, she said. Death will come for us soon enough. Let us give it battle first. The man bowed again, his shame burned away, his loyalty reforged in the fire of her words. Others who had doubted her followed his lead, kneeling, swearing oaths. For the first time that night, unity did not feel fragile but iron-bound. The storm raged, but the hall grew quiet with focus. Men sharpened blades against stone. Women stitched hides into makeshift bindings. Children whispered prayers while clinging to their mothers. Ilara walked among them, her presence a tether that kept them from drifting into despair. At last she returned to the hearth. The ember glowed faintly, dim but alive. She lowered herself to her knees, whispering once more the runes of her mother. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the roar of wind, but the hall hushed to hear it. One by one, voices joined hers, until the chamber thrummed with a chorus of low chants, a song not of triumph but of endurance. The fire flickered weakly in response, as if acknowledging their devotion. Elara smiled faintly, exhaustion heavy upon her bones. "We are ready," she murmured. "Let them come with dawn. Let them see we have not broken." Beyond the walls, the drums quickened, a thunderous rhythm that matched the pounding of hearts within the hall. The enemy was stirring, their fires blazing, their voices carrying faintly through the storm. The siege would not wait long, but inside Cragvind, beneath the frost and fear, something stronger had been forged. Not steel, not stone, but spirit. The spirit of a clan that had faced the coldest night and refused to yield. And at its centre stood
Lady Elara,
scarred, weary, but unbroken, her silhouette framed by the faint glow of embers. She was not only their leader now, she was their fire. The storm had begun to ease, not into silence but into a ragged gasp, like a beast that had spent its fury. Snow still lashed against Cragvind's walls, but the thunderous gales of midnight had softened into a steady moan. The air was no less bitter, the cold no less cruel, yet the change was enough to stir a whisper of anticipation within the hall. Dawn was near. The fire had dwindled to a bed of coals, a faint red heartbeat against the black stone. It gave little heat, but it glowed enough to remind the clan that life remained. Around it, the people moved with new purpose. They no longer crouched in despair, waiting for death's slow hand. They worked, each with trembling limbs, each with frostbitten fingers, but with resolve that cut sharper than the cold. Elara stood at the centre, her axe strapped to her back, her burned hands bound in,
fresh linen strips torn from her own cloak.
Her body screamed with exhaustion, but her eyes were clear, burning with a steady fire. She watched her clan rise from the ruins of fear and become something harder, something sharper. She gave orders, her voice hoarse but steady. Barricade the doors, stack what remains of the tables, the benches, even the stones from the broken wall. If they come, let them choke on our defiance before they cross the threshold. The warriors obeyed, dragging what wood remained, hammering spears into gaps, stacking shields along the entrance. Even the children carried scraps of stone, piling them near the door to be hurled if the enemy breached. The hall throbbed with the rhythm of labour, each clang of wood, each scrape of stone a note in their grim song. "Archers!" Elara called, turning toward the narrow slits carved high into the walls. "Ready your bows!" The storm is thinning. Their fires burn bright. When dawn comes, you will see their faces. Make them par. For every step they take, a handful of men and women, gaunt and shivering, nodded and climbed the steps to the parapets. Their quivers were thin, their bows worn, but their eyes gleamed with the hunger of wolves. She turned then to the women and elders. "Keep the children near the hearth. Keep them wrapped, keep them breathing. If the walls fall, your strength will carry them further than any sword." The elders bowed, their faces lined with grief and resolve. They had buried fear already. Now only duty remained. At last Elara returned to the warriors, gathering them before the hearth. Their faces were hollow, their bodies wasted, but their hands gripped their weapons with a new steadiness. They looked to her as they had all night, but this time there was no doubt, no murmuring, only expectation. She raised her hands, burned and trembling. "We have endured the storm. We have endured hunger and cold. We have seen death among us, and yet we stand. Now the enemy waits, certain we are broken. Let them find not ashes, but steel." Her words echoed through the hall, rising above the crack of the storm. "Swear it now, before the gods, before the ancestors, before each other. Swear that you will not falter. Swear that you will meet the dawn with fire in your hearts." One by one, voices answered. At first weak, then stronger, until the hall shook with their vow. "We endure. We fight. We do not break." The words rolled like thunder, weaving together, binding them tighter than stone. Children whispered it, mothers cried it, warriors shouted it until their throats were raw. The vow became a living thing, heavier and sharper than any blade. Elara lifted her axe,
its blade catching the faint glow of the embers. "Then let this be our bond," she cried. "Tonight we were fire. At dawn we are steel." The clan roared in answer. The sound burst through the cracks, carried out into the storm. Somewhere in the valley the enemy heard it. Perhaps they laughed, perhaps they scowled, but they could not ignore it. Cragvind still breathed, and its fire had not gone out. When the echo faded, silence fell heavy but different from before. It was not the silence of fear nor of despair. It was the silence of preparation, of focus sharpened to a single point. The people settled into their places, archers at the walls, warriors by the doors, mothers with children near the hearth. Every soul held breath for the first light of dawn. Elara stood alone by the doors, her wolfhounds at her side, their eyes glowing amber in the dimness. She laid a hand upon the iron bar that held the gates shut, feeling the tremor of the storm beyond, the pulse of enemy drums. Her burned palms throbbed, but she did not flinch. She whispered softly, not to her people this time, but to herself. "Come dawn, you will see us. Come dawn, you will find not a tomb, but a fortress. Come dawn, you will learn what fire survives in the heart of Cragvind." The wind howled one last furious note, then faltered. Outside, the horizon was still black, but a faint grey thread wove at its edge. Dawn was near. And inside, Elara and her people waited, not as victims, not as prey, but as steel tempered in the fiercest of nights. The first whisper of dawn did not come in light but in sound, the soft faltering of the storm, the hush between the last scream of the wind and the first groan of silence. For hours the night had battered Cragvind, but now the storm's fury waned, spent and hollow. Snow still fell, thick and relentless, but its bite had dulled. In that hush, the fortress breathed differently. It was as though the walls themselves knew the night had been endured. Inside the hall, the clan stirred. Weary eyes opened, breaths shuddered, limbs stiff from huddled sleep. The embers in the hearth glowed faintly, weak but alive, and the vow they had spoken still lingered on their lips. "We endure, we fight, we do not break." Lady Elara stood by the gates, her wolfhounds at her side. Her body was ragged from exhaustion, her hands bandaged and raw, her cloak in tatters, yet she stood straight as an iron spear. She had not slept, she had not faltered. Her eyes were fixed on the faint grey bleeding into the horizon through cracks in the shutters. She knew what it meant. Dawn was coming. Then came another sound, low, rhythmic, steady. The enemy drums. They had not ceased with the storm. If anything, they grew louder, sharper, as though the rival tribe had been waiting for this moment, for the storm's curtain to lift. The fires in the valley blazed brighter now, no longer faint glows in the blizzard but proud beacons, circles of flame where warriors gathered, waiting to climb the cliffs. A murmur spread through the hall. Fear stirred again, mingled with resolve. Some whispered prayers, others gripped weapons tighter. Children whimpered, hushed by mothers who held them close. Every soul in Cragvind knew the night's trial had only been the beginning. Elara turned, raising her voice so all could hear. "Here, we have survived what they thought would kill us. The storm has failed, the cold has failed, but now the enemy comes, and we will show them that we are more than survivors. We are steel." Her words rippled through the crowd. Warriors rose, their armor patched with hides and frost, their blades dull but sharpened as best as they could manage. Women tightened the wrappings on their children, kissed their brows, then took up knives of their own. Even the elders lifted spears that trembled in their hands. Every soul who could stand stood. Elara gave her orders with precision. "Archers to the slits, take their eyes before they reach our gates. Warriors at the doors, brace them with your bodies if wood and iron fail. Mothers, elders, guard the hearth, guard the children. If the walls fall, the fire must not." They moved quickly, purpose cutting through fatigue. The scrape of shields, the snap of bowstrings, the thud of boots against stone, all blended into a rhythm,
a heartbeat of preparer.
Cragvind was no longer merely enduring, it was bracing to strike. The enemy's presence grew louder. Through the narrow windows came shouts, guttural and cruel, carried on the thinning wind. Shadows moved in the valley, figures gathering at the base of the cliffs. They were many, perhaps more than Ilara had dared to imagine, but numbers no longer mattered. What mattered was the fire in her people's hearts, the unity forged in the crucible of the night. One of the children, no more than 6 winters old, tugged at her mother's sleeve. His voice was small but steady. "Will we win?" Ilara heard him, though his words were not meant for her. She turned, kneeling to meet his eyes. Her voice was soft, fierce. "We already have. We live, that is victory, and now we will fight to keep it." The boy nodded, clutching a stone in his tiny fist as if it were a warrior's blade. The drums outside quickened, echoing like thunder against the cliffs. Warriors below shouted, their voices carrying upward. Road, taunts and battle cries that scraped against the ears of those within the fortress. The siege was moments away. Ilara rose to her full height, lifting her axe high. Its blade caught the first faint streak of dawn that bled into the storm, glinting red gold. She faced her people, her silhouette framed by the light. "This is our dawn," she declared. "Not theirs, not death's, ours. The night did not break us, and neither will they. We are Cragvind, we are fire, we are steel." The hall erupted in a roar, not joyous, not wild, but steady, fierce, unyielding. It rolled through the stone, rattled the gates, echoed down into the valley where the enemy gathered. The rival tribe heard it, and though they laughed and shouted louder, they knew then that Cragvind still lived. The first rays of dawn pierced the storm, pale and thin, but unmistakable. They touched the frost-veined walls, the bloodied hands, the hollow faces, and turned them to something harder, brighter. They fell upon Ilara, her axe raised, her eyes burning with the fire of defiance. The night had passed, the storm had failed, the enemy would come, but Cragvind was ready, and Lady Ilara, scarred and sleepless, stood as the heart of a people who had already won the first battle, not with steel but with survival. The first light of dawn bled across the horizon, thin and grey, a hesitant promise after the endless storm. Snow still fell, soft and steady, but the gales had quieted. The tundra lay spread beneath the cliffs like a sheet of white steel, glittering where the sun's first rays touched it. Down in the valley, the enemy's fires guttered in the pale light, replaced now by the sight of men, dozens, perhaps hundreds, gathered with spears and axes, their breath rising in thick clouds. From the ramparts of Cragvind, Ilara watched them. Her bandaged hands rested on the cold stone, her wolfhounds pressed close on either side. Her people had gathered along the walls, warriors with bows and spears, women with knives and stones, even the children peering through the slits, their small eyes wide but steady. The night had burned away their fear, leaving a harder thing in its place. Below, the enemy shouted, drums thundered, echoing against the cliffs, urging them forward. Their voices rose in a cruel chorus, mocking, daring, promising slaughter. They believed Cragvind broken, its defenders wasted by the storm. They did not know the truth, that the night had not destroyed the fortress, but forged it. Ilara raised her axe high. The blade caught the dawn, flaring like fire. Her voice carried over the wind, steady and fierce. "You endured the storm. You endured the cold. Now endure the foe. Let them climb. Let them bleed. Let them know Cragvind does not fall." A roar answered her, fierce and steady, filling the walls, rattling the frost from the stones. The clan was no longer huddled in despair. They were awake, alive, defiant. The enemy began their climb. Dark figures swarmed the cliffs, their shields slung on their backs, their hands clutching rock and ice. They moved with the hunger of wolves, determined and tireless. Arrows hissed upward from below, clattering against stone, but Cragvind's walls held. "Archers!" Ilara cried. From the slits and parapets bows twanged. Arrows rained down, striking climbers from the rock, sending bodies tumbling into the slough below. The enemy howled, but more came, their shouts growing louder. Stones followed. Small hands hurled them with surprising strength, children joining the defense with cries as fierce as their elders. The first wave reached the walls. Hooks bit into stone, ropes swung tight, and enemy warriors hauled themselves upward. Spears thrust from the parapets, stabbing down. Blood spattered on the frost. Ilara herself seized a spear, driving it into the chest of a man who had nearly crested the wall. Her burned hands screamed in pain, but she did not falter. She wrenched the spear free, raised her axe, and roared. The hall below had transformed into a command post. Women tended the children, fed the embers, and bound the wounded. Elders carried water and stones, chanting runes to steel the hearts of those above. Frostfang and Shadowpelt darted along the battlements, snapping at climbing foes, their growls echoing like thunder. But the enemy pressed harder. More ropes flew upward, more hooks clanged against stone. Warriors surged in waves, their numbers endless. For every man cast down, 2 more rose. Arrows dwindled, stones ran thin, and fatigue gnawed at the defenders. Ilara stood at the gates, watching, waiting. She knew this was only the beginning. The real test would come when the enemy reached the doors, when steel clashed against steel, when fire and breath alone would not be enough. She tightened her grip on the axe, her blistered palms raw against the haft. She could not afford weakness now. One of her scouts shouted from the wall, "They bring ladders!" Ilara's eyes snapped to the valley. Yes, amid the swarm, heavy wooden ladders were rising, carried on the shoulders of shouting men. Taller, stronger, harder to break than ropes. The enemy meant to pour over the walls like a flood. "Archers, fire on the carriers!" she commanded. "Warriors, be ready to meet them. Mothers, keep the hearth alight. The children must not freeze, no matter what comes." The clan moved with precision, no hesitation now. Fear had burned away. Duty drove them. Arrows streaked toward the ladder-bearers, felling some, but others pressed on, relentless. Soon the first ladder slammed against the stone, hooks biting deep. Enemy warriors swarmed upward, shields raised, blades gleaming. Ilara strode to the wall herself. She seized a ladder with both hands, her muscles screaming, and shoved. Her people joined her, pushing, heaving, until the ladder wrenched free and crashed into the snow below, crushing the climbers beneath. A cheer rose, but it was short-lived. 2 more ladders thudded against the wall. The battle had begun in earnest. The storm was gone, but the real storm, of men, of blood, of steel, had only just arrived. Ilara lifted her axe high once more, her voice fierce, carrying over the clash. "Hold, Cragvind, hold! You are fire, you are steel, you are unbroken!" And the clan roared with her, their voices a wall of sound against the enemy's tide. The enemy's ladders clung to Cragvind's walls like the claws of some vast beast. Warriors poured upward, their shields raised against the rain of arrows and stones. For every ladder cast down, 2 more rose in its place. The dawn light grew stronger, pale and merciless, illuminating the blood that splattered against the stone and the snow below. The defenders fought with desperate ferocity. Archers loosed until their quivers were empty, then hurled stones with bare hands. Spears thrust downward, skewering climbers, pushing them from the rungs. Women carried buckets of heated water from the embers, flinging them down to scald the hands that clutched the walls. Even the children screamed curses into the wind, hurling scraps of broken pottery at the enemy below. But the tide pressed higher. A ladder breached the parapet, its top clanging against the battlements. With a roar, enemy warriors vaulted over, axes swinging. The first defender fell with his skull split, his body tumbling into the hall below. Another shrieked as a blade bit into his shoulder. Panic rippled along the wall. Ilara was there. Her axe flashed in the pale light, splitting a man's helm, sending blood fountaining. She planted her boot against his chest, shoving him back into the void. Another leapt forward, teeth bared, but her wolfhound Frostfang lunged first, dragging him screaming from the wall. Ilara raised her axe again, her bandaged hands burning, her muscles trembling, but her stance unyielding. "Hold the wall!" she cried, her voice thunderous above the chaos. For Cragvind, for the fire, the defenders rallied.
Shields locked together, spears jabbed in unison. The wall became a line of iron and fury, each heartbeat a defiance against the tide. Yet blood soaked the stones, and bodies piled at their feet. More ladders slammed into place, more warriors surged over. The parapets erupted into chaos, clashing steel, snarling beasts, the scream of wounded. Smoke from the embers below drifted upward, mingling with the stench of sweat and blood. The fortress, once a tomb of cold, had become a furnace of battle. In the hall below, the mothers and elders did not cower. They formed a circle around the hearth, guarding the children with knives and sharpened stakes. Shadows flickered on the walls as they chanted runes, their voices steady, a thread of strength binding the defenders above. Shadowpelt, Ilara's second hound, stood at their side, lips curled, eyes burning like coals. But then the gates groaned. Bolts shuddered, beams cracked. The enemy below had not only climbed, they had begun to batter the doors with logs, their roars echoing up the cliffs. Each strike shook the hall, a thunder that rattled bones. Warriors looked to Ilara with wide eyes. She knew the truth. The walls might hold, but the gates would not. "Down!" she commanded. "To the gates!" She leapt from the parapet, boots slamming into the stone steps, her wolfhound bounding at her heels. Warriors followed, their weapons dripping, their armor smeared with frost and gore. They poured into the hall just as another crash thundered through the doors, splinters flying inward. "Brace it!" Ilara shouted. They heaved broken tables and shattered benches against the wood, pressing their shoulders to the beam. The doors shook again, bowing inward. An axe head split through, flashing in the gloom, then withdrew. A spear thrust after, nearly skewering one of the defenders. The next blow would break them. Ilara pressed her blistered palms to the beam, ignoring the pain, her teeth bared. "You will not pass," she roared. Her people roared with her, their cries filling the hall, their bodies straining against the gate. But the enemy was relentless. The bar cracked, the beam shuddered. The next strike would open the way. In that moment Ilara made her choice. She turned to her warriors. "When they break through, we do not fall back. We strike. Every blade, every stone, every hand. We do not yield the hearth. We do not yield the children. We are the wall." The warriors pounded their fists against the wood, a rhythm of defiance, a heartbeat of iron. Fear had not vanished, but it had hardened into fury. Another crash. The gates splintered wide. A flood of enemy warriors surged into the hall, their axes gleaming, their voices a storm of violence. Ilara's axe swung. It split the first man through, blood spraying across the frost. She roared, driving forward, her wolfhounds leaping at her side. Warriors met the tide head-on, steel clashing, bodies colliding, the hall erupting into chaos. Children screamed, mothers held them tighter. Elders raised knives and struck at legs that came too close. The fire sputtered, casting shadows that danced across the carnage. Cragvind had become a crucible, stone, blood, and will forged into one. Ilara fought like a fury, her bandaged hands slipping on the axe haft, her body burning with pain. Each swing was agony, but each swing felled another foe. She became more than a leader, more than a widow with a dead man's weapon. She became the fire itself, burning even as she bled. Around her the clan fought with the same flame. Warriors fell, but they dragged enemies with them. Mothers slashed with knives, elders stabbed with stakes, children hurled stones with shrill cries. Every soul of Cragvind became a soldier. The gates no longer mattered, the walls no longer mattered. The battle was within now, and the fortress itself seemed to shake with the fury of it. And at its heart stood Lady Ilara, scarred, weary, aflame with will, her axe rising and falling like the hammer of the gods. The hall of Cragvind had become a storm within stone. The clash of steel against steel, the roar of voices, the baying of hounds, it all mingled into a single furious sound, like the earth itself was tearing apart. Smoke from the hearth mingled with the stench of sweat and blood, rising in thick clouds that blurred the afters above. Shadows flickered wildly, cast by the struggling fire that had survived the night, only to witness this final trial. Ilara stood in the center of the maelstrom. Her bandaged hands were slick with blood, her axe haft slippery beneath her grip.
Her hair clung to her face, damp with sweat and frost. Every muscle screamed with exhaustion. Every breath was fire in her chest. Yet she moved still, her axe rising and falling, cutting down every foe that dared step within reach. Her wolfhounds fought beside her, Frostfang tearing into throats, Shadowpelt snapping at legs and dragging men down into the blood-soaked rushes. Their snarls rose above the din, savage and unyielding. The sight of them struck terror even into hardened enemy warriors, who faltered at the beast's fury. But the enemy was many. For every man Elara felled, another surged forward. The gates had burst wide, and now the hall was flooded with steel and hate. Her people fought like wolves cornered. But wolves tire, and the pack is outnumbered. Warriors of Cragrind fell, their blood joining the rivers that streaked across the stone floor. Mothers screamed, elders stabbed with trembling hands, children hurled stones until their arms ached. The fortress trembled with the weight of death. Elara felt her strength waning. Each swing of the axe was heavier, slower. Her vision blurred, her breath ragged. Yet her eyes never dimmed. She saw her people still standing, still fighting, still alive, and knew she could not fall. Not yet. Not while one breath remained in her chest. A massive enemy warrior surged before her, taller than any she had faced, his axe gleaming in the firelight. His roar shook the hall as he swung, the blade whistling toward her head. Elara met it with her own weapon, steel clanging against steel. The shock jolted her arms, splitting her wounds afresh. The warrior pressed forward, strength against strength, his bulk driving her back toward the hearth. The fire crackled behind her, its heat on her back, its smoke in her eyes. She bared her teeth, forcing her feet into the blood-slick stone. Her arms trembled, her knees buckled, but she did not yield. With a cry that shook the rafters, she twisted, letting his weight drive past her. Her axe swept upward, biting deep into his side. He howled, staggering, blood pouring from the wound. Elara wrenched the weapon free and struck again, splitting him down the middle. His body collapsed at her feet, with a thunder that silenced the nearest fighters for a heartbeat. Her people roared at the sight, their voices rising as one. Elara! 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 The enemy faltered. They had come expecting frozen corpses and broken spirits. Instead, they found fire incarnate, a woman who would not fall, a clan that would not break. Doubt flickered in their eyes, and doubt is death's first shadow. Elara seized that moment. She climbed onto the dais beside the hearth, her axe raised high, her body framed by the flame. Her voice rang above the sea.
Chaos, fierce and unyielding, look at us. We are not ash, we are not bones, we are fire. You think to take our home? You think to steal our lives? You will freeze in our shadows, you will burn in our flame. Her people roared with her, their voices thundering louder than the drums outside, louder than the clash of steel. Even the storm beyond seemed to pause, listening. The enemy pressed again, desperate, but now every defender fought with the strength of two. Spears struck truer, knives cut deeper, stones flew harder. The wolfhounds tore through flesh with renewed fury. The clan had become a single blazing thing, bound by Elara's will, unbreakable. Blood flowed. Bodies fell. The floor of Cragvind was slick with death. Yet slowly, surely the tide shifted. The enemy, who had swarmed with such confidence, now stumbled, their advance slowed, their cries tinged with fear. Some faltered, some turned. The unthinkable began to happen. The invaders broke. It was not a sudden rout, but a grinding retreat, pressed backward step by step until they spilled from the hall, dragging their dead, abandoning their ladders. The drums outside faltered, then ceased. The valley below, once a roar of taunts and fire, sank into silence. The battle was over. Elara stood swaying, her axe heavy in her hands, her breath ragged. Her bandages were black with blood, her face pale with exhaustion. Around her, her people slumped where they stood, bleeding, sobbing, laughing through tears. Children clung to their mothers, warriors clasped each other's arms, elders whispered thanks to the ancestors. The hearth still burned. The fire, small but stubborn, had survived the storm, the night,
and the battle. Its glow lit the faces of the living and cast shadows over the dead. Elara looked upon it, her vision blurring with tears she had not allowed until now. "We endured," she whispered. "We endured." The first true light of dawn spilled through the shattered gates then, golden and soft, bathing the hall in
warmth. It touched the wounded, the weary, the dead. It gilded the stone walls and painted the blood red as rubies. It crowned Elara in its glow, turning her battered figure into something larger than life. Her people gathered around her, silent, reverent. They saw not a widow, not a woman scarred and weary, but the fire that had carried them through the longest night. Elara raised her axe one final time, her voice steady though her body trembled. "This dawn is ours. This fire is ours. Cragvind stands." And with those words the fortress roared anew, not in despair, not in fear, but in triumph. Their voices rose into the morning sky, carried on the wind, echoing across the tundra. Cragvind had endured, and Lady Elara, Heart of Fire, would be remembered as the woman who turned a night of death into a dawn of defiance.